together. So for me, that was like just a pointer that said, maybe the New Jerusalem is coming down at the beginning. Maybe that's what we're all looking forward to. And then another thing was just some of these. I've really been relooking my all these Old Testament scriptures that talk about the promises, the blessings to Israel that will, the Davidic covenant, Abrahamic covenant, and how those are going to be fulfilled. Dispensationalists say those are all literal prophecies that are going to be literally fulfilled in the millennium, because for them that is, it's at the perfect time and place for all of that to be fulfilled. But if you read the New Testament, time after time, the New Testament writers are looking at those Old Testament prophecies of Israel and saying that those prophecies are fulfilled in Jesus, that those prophecies are fulfilled in the church. So I undertook all my serious study of prophecy from this dispensational perspective that says that the church is just a parenthesis in God's plan. And we got to understand, and replacement theology was a bad thing. To think that the church replaced Israel, that's a bad thing. But what I'm beginning to see is that, the New Testament writers, they said all those prophecies were fulfilled by Israel, by Jesus, by the church. So it was really a non-literalistic kind of interpretation that the New Testament writers had. But yet, I still think there's a tremendous amount of good things, good ideas that were brought up through dispensationalism. The final 7-year period. But going back to another point, and then I'll let you carry on. But I was just looking at how Jesus, he met the woman at the well, and he offered to her living water, saying, "I'm the one who can provide you with living water." The only other time we hear living water ever talked about is in the final chapters of Ezekiel, talking about what we refer to as the millennial temple. Right? That's what Ezekiel says, that out of that temple will flow rivers of living water, and that's what the prophets were saying. But what I've also noticed is that all those prophecies were conditional. They were saying, Israel, if you follow the law, if you obey God, then this is the glorious future that you can look forward to. And I think Jesus was basically saying, I'm the one who's fulfilling these prophecies. I can give you living water right now. And then elsewhere, he talked about how he was the temple. He said, if you destroy this in 3 days, it will be built again. They thought he was talking about the literal temple, and the New Testament writer says Jesus was actually talking about himself. So Jesus was claiming basically to be that millennial temple. So when I look to the millennium now, I see the New Jerusalem coming down right at the beginning of the millennium, and the amazing thing about the New Jerusalem is that there is no temple in it. It says that God and Jesus are the temple, and they're the source of light, and they're the source of living water. It says living water flows. Ezekiel says living water flows from the temple, but in Revelation 21 and 22, it just says that living water is just flowing out of the midst of the city. Yeah, and there is no temple. Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of things, and I'm not sure where you've gone with all of these different things, but I'm really excited. When is your book coming out?
December 4th is our target date.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're right at the door here. Yeah.
All right.
I'll definitely be checking it out.
Yeah.
But
and a passage.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Thanks for calling in, man. I was just going to say Ezekiel 43, verse 7. This one that really caught my attention. And he said to me, "Son of man, this is the place of my throne, and the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the children of Israel forever." When I read that, I'm like, wow, what part of forever don't we understand, right? So if we have, if we have the traditional paradigm of the earth getting blown up after the 1,000 years, and then he does a new thing, it's like, well, he's not exactly in the midst of Israel forever. Then you have Daniel 7:18, another great one. "But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever." And of course, we have the same promise given in just different words in Daniel 2:44. "And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom. Now, the kings are talking about the bad guys, right, in the tribulation.
Yeah.
So it's in those days that the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. So, I'm like, well, this is forever and ever.
Yeah.
Well, how much of, forever don't we get? Like, he's going to set up a kingdom then and there that will never pass away. It doesn't get blown up. It endures forever.
Yeah. And there's another point to be made. Throughout the New Testament, Jesus and the Apostle Paul, they talk about the future in terms of this age and the age to come. That's it. This age and the age to come. And the transition between the ages takes place at the second coming. Mm-hmm. So there's only this age and the age to come.
Yeah.
If you're gonna say that heaven and earth passes away after the 1,000 years, first you have the second coming and 1,000 years, then heaven and earth pass away. It just creates a lot of confusion.
Mm-hmm. It really does.
Point. That is a great point.
So thanks a lot for taking my call. I'm gonna have to run, but I'm gonna keep listening.
All right. Well, thank you, Peter, for calling in. And that was a great question, a great point that he brought up, Doug, and I'd actually like to give you some time to explore this point for a little while. Jesus is the millennial temple, that idea. I'm just going to leave it there. What are your thoughts on that concept?
Well, I do see there as being an actual structure. There's a building. If you look at Ezekiel 40 through 48, I mean, it's pretty clear that you have some kind of an actual edifice that isn't Jesus. It's made of stones. It has ornamentation. It has guardhouses. It has actual dimensions. It has a wall. And what I find so interesting is right now, today, there is the temple of God in heaven. And if we go to Revelation chapter 3, we read about that temple of God in heaven, and he promises that the one who overcomes, he's going to make a pillar in the temple of God, which is in the paradise of God. And it's rather interesting. It's in verse 12. He who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go out no more. I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God. Now, thinking about this temple of God in heaven, if we go back to the Hebrew Scriptures, we see in Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah is taken in the Spirit. He sees a vision, and he's taken into the temple. And there, the Lord God Almighty is seated on the throne, and the train of his robe fills the temple, and it's the doorposts shake, and there's smoke and all this stuff. And then this angel, because Isaiah says, "Woe am I, right? For I'm a man of unclean lips, and I dwell among a people of unclean lips." An angel goes to the altar, gets a coal with some tongs, and takes it and touches it to his lips. That's the temple of God in heaven. We're told in Hebrews that Jesus went into the temple, that is not of this creation, not made with human hands, because it's not of this creation, and there he offered not the blood of goats and calves, but his own blood on the altar. And, it's somehow it's very metaphysical. I don't know how he did that, but I'm not God. It doesn't matter. But he did it. He went into that temple, the one that's made up there. God told Moses that he was to carefully follow the pattern shown to him, because it was a copy of the one above. So, he was to carefully follow that. And then we see in other portions of Revelation, for example, we have in Revelation 15, it says that no one could come out of the temple. Verse 8, the temple was filled with smoke, and from the glory of God and from his power, no one was able to enter the temple till the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were completed. So nobody can come out of that. And another one that I missed here is Revelation chapter 11. It says, "Then the temple of God was opened in heaven, and the ark of his covenant was seen in his temple, and there were lightnings, noises, thunderings, and earthquake, and great hail." So there is a temple of God in heaven. There's no question about it. Currently in the New Jerusalem, there's a temple of God. But then John in Revelation 21 says, "And there was no temple." Right? You're like, no, wait a second. So there was a temple, but then there isn't going to be a temple. What's going on with that? It's my suspicion that the temple of God that is currently there is going to move. Now, either whatever is there currently will just be taken down, and then we have a completely different structure built on planet Earth, or maybe it's the same actual structure. It's kind of funny. I've actually been to the London Bridge, but it wasn't in London. I actually got to go to the London Bridge. It's in Arizona, of all places. It's in this little town. I'm trying to think of the name of the little town. Lake. It's the craziest little place, but it's way too hot. And they have the London Bridge. They literally moved it brick by brick or stone by stone. And so my point is that the temple of God in heaven, maybe I don't know if it's going to be brick by brick, but you could actually move the entire structure to planet Earth. And that's my suspicion. Now, I can't prove that from Scripture. It's just a hunch. It does say in Zechariah chapter 5 that the Messiah is going to build the temple. Actually, is it? Yeah, chapter 5. Yeah. So I'm just double rethinking that. It's either chapter 5 or chapter 6. It's actually chapter 6. Sorry about that. Anyway, yeah. So you have the Messiah is going to build the temple, and so again, there will be some kind of a structure, but inside the city itself, the temple of God in heaven that is there will be taken away. Now, why is there a temple of God in heaven? I guess that's probably the better question. I mean, like, really? There's a temple of God in heaven? In the New Jerusalem, there's a temple of God? This goes back to the very nature of God, to the fiery lightning presence of God, that God is a consuming fire. Somehow we have forgotten this. We have glossed over this. We have marginalized this reality. We've spiritualized it. Said, oh, that's just spiritual talk. God doesn't really have fire coming out of him. Come on. But yes, he does. We see it all over the place that God really does have fire, and it's an incredible scene once you begin to see all the places that talk about this. One of my favorites, Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 26, "In the firmament above their heads was the likeness of a throne, in appearance like a sapphire stone. On the likeness of the throne was a likeness with the appearance of a man high above it. Also from the appearance of his waist upward I saw, as it were, the color of amber." That's the Hebrew word chashmal. It means electricity. "With the appearance of fire all around within it. And from the appearance of his waist and downward I saw, as it were, the appearance of fire with brightness all around." So this is the glory of the Lord. This is God himself that he is seeing, and we see that there's fire coming out of him. I mean, there's so many passages, Daniel chapter 7, that there's this fiery stream coming out from God. I won't go into all the passages, but literally, God is a consuming fire, and that's what Scripture tells us. So why would he need to why would he need to be in this temple of God in heaven? Because he is actually protecting us from him. When you realize that we are now incompatible with God, that we cannot dwell in his presence. You see, sometimes I think we have this idea that God is really quite he's really stuck up, basically. He thinks just a bit too high of himself because he doesn't want to associate with us. He doesn't care to be with us. He's a bit too good for us, snooty, if you will. But that's not the case at all. God is incredibly in love with us, but he's like the father, and we're like the boy in the bubble. And the boy in the bubble is in the bubble because if he comes out, he will die because he's incompatible with the environment outside that bubble. The bubble is the only thing that's keeping him alive. And God, essentially, because of who he is, this fiery lightning presence, and what sin did to us, death, when death entered in, it meant that God could no longer hang out with us. It wasn't that God didn't want to allow sin into his presence. You've probably heard this. Well, God can't allow sin into his presence. Sure he can. Not a problem. It's just that sin can't be in his presence. Someone who doesn't have a new body cannot survive in God's presence. It's no different than if you go for a swim in a volcano. It's just not going to work out. You and the lava are not going to mix. But if you have a body that is fiery, you could go swim in the lava all you want because it's not going to hurt. And until we get our new bodies, we cannot actually be with God because we're incompatible. So that's why the Lord Jesus had to come. He had to do what only he could do, which was to give us a new body, both in a legal fashion. There were legal obstacles that had to be overcome. A lien against planet Earth, etc. But there's also, we need a new composition. We need a new body that is sustainable, that is able to be in God's presence. And that we are still waiting for. That's our resurrection body. And once we have that resurrection body, we put on this garment of Yeshua, the garment of salvation. Once we have that, we can stand in his presence without any problem. And a passage that I find very almost humorous is 1 Corinthians chapter 3. It says, verse 12, "Now if anyone builds on this foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, each one's work will become clear. For the day will declare it, because it will be revealed by fire, and the fire will test each one's work of what sort it is." I love that. Mm-hmm. So, imagine here you are standing before the Lord, and I think the day here is talking about the day that Jesus comes back. We have our new resurrection bodies, and now we're going to be tested. We're going to be tested because we all will be there with various kinds of works. Some works will have been translated into gold and silver and precious stones. I think those are the things that we do, and they actually have value. They build up God's kingdom. They acts of service to one another, evangelism, etc. And then we're going to have some wood, hay, and straw as well. Those are the lousy, good-for-nothing kind of works that we did for our own glory, etc. And so there we are standing before the Lord. For the first time ever, his fire comes raging at us, and it's going to consume us, just like water pouring over someone. When you go stand in a waterfall, it's going to completely envelop us, and this will be the new medium that we live in. It's God's eternal fire that we will be living in. But it's going to be cool because it's not going to hurt us. There will be a small amount of loss. The wood, hay, and straw will burn away. But everything else, it says it will be revealed by fire. And the fire will test each one's work of what sort it is. And then it goes on, "If anyone's work which he has built on it endures, he will receive a reward. If anyone's work is burned, he will suffer loss, but he himself will be saved, yet so as through fire." So, for the believer, there may be a minor loss, but he himself will be saved, and this fire is what will be consuming us. It'll be the ultimate baptism in fire. But the thing is, we're going to now live in this new medium of fire. Just like today we live in the medium of air, and fish live in a medium called water, I think the new medium is going to be God's fire, God's plasma. However whatever that feels like or looks like, it will be, the fish doesn't realize he's in water until he's not, right? And we don't realize that we're living in an oxygen environment until we're not, and then it becomes very apparent that we can't survive in a different environment. So that will be the new paradigm. But until that day, God has had to basically shut himself out. He's had to contain himself because the very planet is not able to sustain him, nor is anybody on the planet able to sustain his incredible power. And here's the thing. When you understand the image of God, the fire of God, the veil between heaven and earth, then it begins to make sense of, strange things such as hell. And we see from Isaiah 33, it talks about hell. It's called Tophet. And you can see the cross-reference in Jeremiah 7:31 that Tophet is, in fact, Gehenna. It's the place called Ben Hinnom. And it says, "For Tophet was established of old. Yes, for the king it is prepared." I believe that's talking about Satan. "He has made it deep and large. Its pyre is fire with much wood. The breath of the Lord like a stream of brimstone kindles it." So this is what hell will consist of. And just to underscore that conclusion, in Daniel 7, verse 10 and 11, it says, "A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him." And then verse 11, "I watched then because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame." Well, it's the flame that's coming out of God. It's the fiery stream that kindles this place called Tophet. That is what hell will consist of. That is what the lake of fire is going to be kindled by, is the very fire that's coming out of God. But we're all going to live in that medium. So as a believer, I will be exposed to the fires of Gehenna just as much as anybody else. But it's not going to hurt me. It's not going to be a problem because my very nature will be of some kind of a fiery kind of nature. Though I'm going to have a real body, etc. But it'll be a body that is akin to the plasma of God versus one that is not ready to be in the plasma of God. Maybe that's the way to describe it. But so when that veil between heaven and earth comes down, and I actually see two veils. You have the one veil that is just like the main door to the tabernacle. The tabernacle had the outside door, so there was just the general people who were outside, the perimeter. And then if you go inside, you have the actual building where the holy place is, and then you have the Holy of Holies. Between those two, there was another veil, and only the high priest could go in there, where God's Shekhinah, his Shekinah, was actually behind that. And so I think the veil between heaven and earth is the general door to the perimeter, and then the temple of God in heaven, when that thing opens, that is going to be that inner barrier between the holy place and the Holy of Holies. And so when that goes down, the temple of God in heaven that is currently containing God, that's withholding his power from the cosmos, is going to be lifted, and then his power, his fire, his lightning, his electricity is going to fill everything. And that's why the earth has to be recreated, has to be restored. That degenerative decay property has to be removed from the planet, because if it were not, then just like on Mount Sinai, when it began to burn and to smoke, the earth would not be able to withstand the presence of God. But it's going to be liberated from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the sons of God. And then the earth is going to breathe deeply and say, good, we're ready to be reunited with our Creator. There is no compatibility issue between us. So that's what I understand about the tabernacle, and I hope that answers the question.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot there. Actually, there's a lot of things I'd like to respond to, but in the interest of time, there's actually some more points I want to hit. So that was a great response, by the way. Thank you for that. And the next thing I want to touch on is this idea that there's going to be different kinds of populations in the earth. In your book, as I was going through the draft, by the way, because we're coming out with the final version, hopefully,
Yes.
December 4th.
Yes.
But when I was going through, the draft you sent me, one of the things that you had made a distinction on was the mortal Adamites and the immortal Adamites. And you did something interesting where you brought it back to this lovely passage of scripture called the judgment of sheep and goat nations. So I'm just going to let you talk through your perspective on how this group of non-immortal Adamites, in contrast to the immortal Adamites, ends up in this millennial setting.
Well, it says that when the Lord returns, that men will be more rare than the gold of Ophir. And I'm dying to know how much gold there is in Ophir. But even where Ophir is exactly, I'd go start a mine or something. But apparently there's quite a bit of gold. But men will be more rare than the gold of Ophir. So, however many people are left on the planet, we don't know. Just taking a look at the book of Revelation, we can see that it's going to be reduced by a lot. Let's just say that. So I would presume have, several million people left, starting with 7 billion plus. We're going to be down to several million, maybe even less than that. I don't know exactly. But the survivors, in fact, we see this in Isaiah chapter 4. In Isaiah chapter 4, it says, and it shall come to pass that he who is left in Zion and remains in Jerusalem will be called holy, everyone who is recorded among the living in Jerusalem, when the Lord has washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion and purged the blood of Jerusalem from her midst by the spirit of judgment and by the spirit of burning. So, in the context of the Jewish people, you have people that actually made it, that didn't die during the tribulation. Somehow, some way, they were able to survive, even though it's going to be incredibly cataclysmic, but they survived. And those people that survive, they will go into the millennium, and they will have children, and of course, great-grandchildren, etc., until you have many generations. There's no need for them to die. There'll be nothing that would actually cause these people to die, except, being foolish. And I believe that they're going to have a 100-year grace period. I base that on Isaiah chapter 65, verse 20.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there it says, "For the child shall die 100 years old, and the sinner being 100 years old shall be accursed." Now, in Numbers 32, it talks about everyone who was 20 years old and above would not enter into the land of promise because they rebelled against the Lord. So that means that if you were 19, you got to enter in. You did not die in the wilderness. But if you were 20, you're counted as an adult. And somehow I think that there may be a correlation. And I have to admit, I looked at this verse for a long time, and I wasn't able to come up with a absolutely conclusive understanding of it. And I thought I could basically go two ways. Either it's a maximum of 100 years or it's a minimum of 100 years. But we also have in the rest of Isaiah 65, it says that the people will, verse 22, "For as the days of a tree, the days of my people, so shall be the days of my people." So, I thought, trees can live quite a while. It doesn't seem like they're going to just kick the bucket at 100. And, if you're not really a child, if you kick the bucket at 100. So I thought, if you die at 100, you're like, oh my, you're just a youth, like what we say if someone's 20, you're like, oh my, you're just a baby, right? But so by that time, if you make it to 100, people are like, that's your time of innocence, your time of not being held accountable. And then after that, I believe that's when people will be held accountable very strictly for their actions. There won't be too many, grace period opportunities at that point, because the situation is so different. You have Jesus, the Father as well, living on planet Earth. You don't have to believe by faith. You just have to put your shoes on and walk up to the city. So that's the basic story for the mortals. They are contrasted by the immortals, who will be those of us who have put our trust in the Lord today, as well as Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and I'd go straight back to Adam. Anybody who was considered righteous, anybody who was looking forward to the promised one, to the Messiah, is going to be among that number. They will be resurrected. And, one problem that I find disturbing about traditional dispensationalism is that so many of the Old Testament saints don't get to be in the party. They like, well, they've got to wait until after the 1,000 years. And I'm like, you're kidding. I mean, Jesus is here. This is the big time for Israel, and they don't get to be part of the 1,000